The Bet. The Bet is a short story by Anton Chekhov, was written in 1889. It is about a banker and a young lawyer who bet with each other whether death penalty is better than life imprisonment. It was a dark autumn night. The old banker was walking up and down his study room and remembering how, 15 years ago, he had given a party one autumn evening. There had been many clever men there, and there had been interesting conversations. Besides other things, they had also talked about capital punishment. The majority of the guests, among whom were many journalists and intellectual men, disapproved of the death penalty. Some were of the opinion that death penalty ought to be replaced everywhere by imprisonment for life. "I don't agree with you," said the host, the banker. "Capital punishment kills a man at once, but lifelong imprisonment kills him slowly." "Both are equally immoral," observed one of the guests. "For they both have the same object, to take away life. The state is not God. It does not have the right to take away what it cannot restore when it wants to." Among the guests was a young lawyer, a young man of 25. When he was asked about his opinion, he said, "The death sentence and the life sentence are equally immoral. But if I had to choose between them, I would certainly choose the second. To live anyhow is better than not at all." A lively discussion arose. The banker, who was younger and more nervous in those days, was suddenly carried away by excitement. He struck the table with his fist and shouted at the young man, "It is not true. I'll bet you 2 millions if you stay in solitary confinement for 5 years. "If you mean that in earnest," said the young man, "I'll take the bet, but I would stay not 5, but 15 years. 15. Done," cried the banker. "Gentlemen, I stake 2 millions. Agreed. You take your millions, and I stake my freedom," said the young man. And this wild, senseless bet was carried out. The banker, spoilt and frivolous, with millions beyond his reckoning, was delighted at the bet. At supper, he made fun of the young man and said, "Think better of it, young man, while there is still time. To me, 2 millions are a trifle. But you are losing 3 or 4 of the best years of your life. I say 3 or 4, because you won't stay longer. Don't forget either, you unhappy man, that voluntary confinement is a great deal harder to bear than compulsory. The thought that you have the right to step out in liberty at any moment will poison your whole existence in prison. I am sorry for you." Then he remembered what followed that evening. It was decided that the young man should spend the years of his captivity under the strictest supervision in one of the lodges in the banker's garden. It was agreed that for 15 years he should not be free to cross the threshold of the lodge, to see human beings, to hear the human voice, or to receive letters and newspapers. He was allowed to have a musical instrument and books, and was allowed to write letters, to drink wine, and to smoke. By the terms of the agreement, the only relations he could have with the outer world were by a little window made purposely for that purpose. He might have anything he wanted, books, music, wine, and so on, in any quantity he desired by writing an order, but could only receive them through the window. The agreement provided for every detail and every trifle that would make his imprisonment strictly solitary, and bound the young man to stay there exactly 15 years, beginning from
12 o'clock of November 14, 1870, and ending at 12 o'clock of November 14, 1885.
The slightest attempt on his part to break the conditions, if only 2 minutes before the end, would release the banker from the obligation to pay him 2 millions. For the first year of his confinement, as far as one could judge from his brief notes, the prisoner suffered severely from loneliness and depression.
In the second year, the prisoner asked only for the classics. In the 5th year,
those who watched him through the window said that all that year he spent doing nothing but eating and drinking and lying on his bed, frequently yawning and angrily talking to himself. He did not read books. Sometimes at night he would sit down to write. He would spend hours writing, and in the morning tear up all that he had written. More than once he could be heard crying. In the second half of the 6th year, the prisoner began jealously studying languages, philosophy and history. He threw himself eagerly into these studies, so much so that the banker had enough to do to get him the book he ordered. In the course of 4 years, some 600 volumes were procured at his request. It was during this period that the banker received the following letter from his prisoner. My dear jailer, I write you these lines in 6 languages. Show them to people who know the languages. Let them read. If they find not one mistake, I implore you to fire a shot in the garden. That shot will show me that my efforts have not been thrown away. The geniuses of all ages and of all lands speak different languages, but the same flame burns in them all. Oh, if you only knew what unearthly happens my soul feels now from being able to understand them. The prisoner's desire was fulfilled. The banker ordered 2 shots to be fired in the garden. Then after the 10th year, the prisoner sat immovably at the table and read nothing but the gospel. It seemed strange to the banker that a man who in 4 years had mastered 600 learned volumes should waste nearly a year one thin book of easy comprehension. In the last 2 years of his confinement, the prisoner read an immense quantity of books quite indiscriminately. At one time, he was busy with the natural sciences, and then he would ask for Byron or Shakespeare. There were notes in which he demanded at the same time books on chemistry and a manual of medicine, and a novel and some treatise on philosophy or theology. His reading suggested a man swimming in the sea among the wreckage of his ship, and trying to save his life by greedily clutching first at one spar and then at another. The old banker remembered all this and thought, tomorrow at 12 o'clock he will regain his freedom. By our agreement, I ought to pay him 2 millions. If I do pay him, it is all over with me. I shall be utterly ruined. 15 years before, he had many millions. He had lost a great deal of money in gambling. Cursed bet, muttered the old man, clutching his head in despair. Why didn't the man die? He's only 40 now. He will take my last penny from me. He will marry, will enjoy life, will gamble, while I shall look at him with envy like a beggar, and hear from him every day the same sentence. I am indebted to you for the happiness of my life. Let me help you. No, it's too much. The one means of being saved from bankruptcy and disgrace is the death of that man. It struck 3 o'clock. The banker listened. Everyone was asleep in the house, and nothing could be heard outside the rustling of the chilled trees. Trying to make no noise, he took from a fireproof safe the key of the door which had not been opened for 15 years, put on his overcoat, and went out of the house. It was dark and cold in the garden. Rain was falling. A damp cutting wind was racing about the garden, howling and giving the trees no rest. The banker strained his eyes, but could see neither the earth nor the white statue, nor the lodge nor the trees. Going to the spot where the lodge stood, he twice called the watchman. No answer followed. Evidently, the watchman had sought shelter from the weather, and was now asleep somewhere either in the kitchen or in the greenhouse. If I had the luck to carry out my intention, thought the old man, suspicion would fall first upon the watchman. He felt in the darkness for the steps and the door, and went into the entry of the lodge. Then he groped his way into a little passage and lighted a match. There was not a soul there. There was a bedstead with no bedding on it, and in the corner there was a dark cast iron stove. The seals on the door leading to the prisoner's room were intact. When the match went out, the old man, trembling with emotion, peeped through the little window. A candle was burning dimly in the prisoner's room. He was sitting at the table. Nothing could be seen but his back, the hair on his head, and his hands. Open books were lying on the table, on the 2 easy chairs, and on the carpet near the table. 5 minutes passed, and the prisoner did not once stir. 15 years' imprisonment had taught him to sit still. The banker tapped at the window with his finger, and the prisoner made no movement whatever in response. Then the banker cautiously broke the seals of the door and put the key in the keyhole. The rusty lock gave a grating sound, and the door creaked. The banker expected to hear at once footsteps and a cry of astonishment, but 3 minutes passed, and it was as quiet as ever in the room. He made up his mind to go in. At the table, a man unlike ordinary people was sitting motionless. He was a skeleton with the skin drawn tight over his bones, with long curls like a woman's and a shaggy beard. His face was yellow, with an earthy tint in it. His cheeks were hollow, his back long and narrow, and the hand on which his shaggy head was propped was so thin and delicate that it was dreadful to look at it. His hair was already streaked with silver, and seeing his emaciated, aged-looking face, no one would have believed that he was only 40. He was asleep. In front of his bowed head, there lay on the table a sheet of paper on which there was something written in fine handwriting. Poor creature, thought the banker. He is asleep and most likely dreaming of the millions. And I have only to take this half-dead man, throw him on the bed, stifle him a little with the pillow, and the most expert would find consciences no sign of a violent death. But let me first read what he has written here. The banker took the page from the table and read as follows. Tomorrow, at 12 o'clock, I regain my freedom and the right to associate with other men. But before I leave this room and see the sunshine, I think it's necessary to say a few words to you. With a clear conscience, I tell you, as before God who beholds me, that I despise freedom and life and health, and all that in your books is called the good things of the world. For 15 years, I have been intently studying earthly life. It is true, I have not seen the earth or men, but through your books I have climbed to the peaks of Elburz and Mont Blanc, and from there I have seen the sunrise and have watched it at evening flood the sky, the ocean, and the mountain tops with gold and crimson. I have seen green forests, fields, rivers, lakes, towns. In your books, I have flung myself into the bottomless pit, performed miracles, slain, burnt towns, preached new religions, and conquered whole kingdoms. Your books have given me wisdom. All that the untrusting thought of a man has created in the ages is compressed into a small compass in my brain. I know that I am wiser than all of you, and I despise your books. I despise wisdom and the blessings of this world. It is all worthless. You may be proud, wise, and fine, but death will wipe you off the face of the earth. To prove to you in action how I despise all that you live by, I renounce the 2 millions of which I once dreamt as of paradise, and which now I despise. To deprive myself of the right to the money, I shall go out from here 5 hours before the time fixed, and so break the bet. When the banker had read this, he laid the page on the table, kissed the strange man on the head, and went out of the lodge, weeping. At no other time, even when he had lost heavily in gambling, had he felt so great a hatred for himself. When he got home, he lay on his bed, but his tears and emotion kept him away from sleeping for hours. Next morning, the watchman ran in with pale faces and told him they had seen the man who lived in the lodge climb out of the window into the garden, go to the gate, and disappear. The banker went at once with the servants to the lodge and made sure of the flight of his prisoner. To avoid arousing unnecessary talk, he took from the table the writing in which the millions were refused, and when he got home locked it up in the fireproof safe.